Oh man. What's up, Relentless students and parents or any other weird person who might watch this? Today we're going to be talking about storms in our lives. And if this, our digital Devo definitely has a title. We're not post-productioning the title this time. And the title is called Staying Through the Storm. And I want to read to you guys what I think is a really awesome chapter of the Bible. I think a lot of times it gets kind of overlooked a little bit. For me, it's probably one of the coolest stories I think that exists in the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. But it's a story that's really spoken to me in my life, and so I want to share it with you students because I think this is a really appropriate time for this word. So we're coming out of Acts chapter 27. Verses 18 through 32. That's a lot of verses, I know, but we'll get through it quick, so don't freak out or anything like that. And this is the Apostle Paul talking about a storm that he went through while he was on his way to Rome. We took such a violent beating from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. And after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and to whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that this will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.' On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea. That's what they called it back then. When about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later they took soundings again and found that it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern, that's the back, and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.' So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away." Now, I find this story completely fascinating on a lot of different levels, because just to give you some backstory, so Paul had been arrested by the Roman government because he had been starting and planting churches all over the Western Roman Empire, and had even had connections to a church that had started in the capital of Rome. And at this time, Rome's emperor was getting nervous because, the church planting and starting churches was not something that really happened in the world at this point, because all the world's religions have been around for hundreds or thousands of years, or since the beginning of memory and history, and so starting up a new religion and starting new churches was something that was really outside the norm, and it was really groundbreaking, and it was really, to be honest with you, it was really frightening for people who didn't know what Christianity was or didn't like it or didn't believe in it. And it caused a lot of civil unrest, and it caused a lot of economic unrest, because in the communities, in these churches that Paul was planting, things like human trafficking and things like slavery and things like prostitution rings, and a lot of these businesses that profited from the debauchery of society really began to suffer. And so it caused a lot of just the unrest, because people were changing their lifestyle because they were being changed by the gospel and the salvation of Jesus. And so at some point, Rome began to really see the Christian church as not just a new upstart religion, but as like a serious political threat. And so the dude that was probably the most famous, especially in the Christian church, was Paul, and he was the most famous because he went all over the place, and he wrote letters, and he preached, and he planted churches, and miracles and crazy things just followed him everywhere he went. I mean, look at the situation with the jailer in Philippi where the prison fell apart around them, and then they planted a church and tons of people got saved. I mean, it was like stuff like this was common. So word about this dude and stories about him traveled. And so at some point, the emperor of Rome, that's who Caesar was, that's what the emperor was called, regardless of what their actual name was, decided that this dude needed to stand trial before him, which was, if you stood trial before the emperor in Rome, you most likely died. Because by the time you got to that point, you were already considered like a top 10, like most wanted criminal of the empire. Like, you didn't just stand before the emperor and stand trial with the emperor as your judge, jury, and executioner because, you were lifting bread because you were hungry. Like, Paul was like a legitimate enemy of the state in Rome. And so he was arrested by Roman soldiers, by centurions, meaning that a centurion had 100 soldiers at his command. So these were high-ranking military officials who were escorting Paul from wherever he had been arrested. They had sailed already from the city of his arrest to the island of Crete, which is in the Mediterranean Sea. And back then, Crete wasn't exactly the nicest place. It was kind of a rough and tumble island. It was a seaport. There was just a lot of undesirable things about it. And the crew of the ship that he was sailing on, they didn't want to stay because they didn't like it. It wasn't a good place, and there was civil unrest there because of other reasons, and so they just didn't want to be there any longer than they had to. And earlier in the chapter, Paul told the sailors, hey, we shouldn't sail from this place because God's warned me not to, and so I know you don't want to be here, but we need to stay here for a little bit until God says it's safe for us to go. Well, the sailors didn't listen to him. They didn't really believe in Paul's God. They could have cared less what he said, and so they were like, no, we're gonna sail whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter, And so they sailed out when the sailors thought the weather would be great, and it ended up being terrible. And back then with ships, even ships that were powered by slaves that rowed, which this ship wasn't because it was a smaller one, when a really bad storm came up on the ocean or the Mediterranean Sea, there was nothing the sailors could do to propel the ship to get through the storm as quickly as possible. In modern naval and nautics, if you come up against a storm, you steam your ship full power into the storm and into the crashing waves because that's the most that gives you the best chances to survive. Plus, you ride through the storm faster if you pilot your ship straight into it. As scary as that sounds, trying to go around it or trying to miss it is not really possible. Storms on the ocean or on the open sea are very enormous, and ships don't move, even today, extremely fast. So you have to go through it. Well, back then, they couldn't go through it. You just had to go into it. And then wherever the storm took you, you just had to ride it out. And so they were in this storm for 14 days. So for 2 weeks at sea, these men were terrified that they were all going to die. And the storm was so bad that they weren't eating, or maybe they ran out of food because they weren't expecting to be in a storm for 2 weeks, just getting tossed about wherever the storm was taking them across the sea. And they really had no way of getting out of it other than the storm just slowly spitting them out of the storm in whatever place that happened at. Well, that didn't happen. They just stayed in it. And it just took them wherever it was going, and they just couldn't escape it. And they really began to completely and totally lose hope. And at one point, it was like everybody on the ship, when Paul says, when we all lost hope of being saved, it was kind of like everybody was ready to just give up on this boat, on their situation, and just take their chances with whatever terrible decisions they were making. And I love how Paul stood up at one point when he realized everybody had lost all hope, and he was like, men, if you had only listened to me. And that's one of my least favorite dudes in my life, is when I'm in the middle of like a horrible storm of my own making, because it was a decision that I made. These sailors were in this storm because they chose to be, because they made a poor choice, because they didn't listen to a dude that gave them sound and wise advice, because they were already in a situation that they didn't like, So I guess you could say they were in a metaphorical storm on the island because they were in a situation they didn't like and didn't want to be in, and they just wanted to get out of it. And so they made a decision that brought them into a second storm that they had no control over, that was way worse than the first one that they were in. And we do that to ourselves a lot. The first storm is always the storm that you can kind of control in your life, but the second one is the one that you never can. Because when you get into a second storm in your life because you made poor decisions in the first storm that you were in, you know, it's the second one's always way worse than the first. And I'll give you guys maybe like just a really good practical example of that. You know, I've never known a single person in my entire life that didn't go through a season of really great sadness or really great darkness where they were just struggling with things like anxiety or things like depression or things like despair or confusion. And a lot of times that's a storm that comes into our life that we you know can't really control because it happens because of you know situations that are outside of our control and completely outside of our doing, and it's something that affects us. Maybe some trauma happened to you, or someone that you loved was taken away. You know, fill in the blank. I mean, we've all been through those moments in our lives because of a lot of different reasons, and we were there because of stuff that we couldn't control or stuff that we didn't do. And so a lot of times when we go through those storms in our life that we had no control over, that we didn't make decisions that put them there, we decide to do things to medicate the pain that we're feeling to help us navigate that current storm that's in our life. And so we make decisions that end up feeding into the darkness that we're already facing. And so the practical example I want to give is people who battle with depression because of whatever has happened or whatever has been done, you know, and I think every human being goes through a time in their life where they deal with that. And there are some people that deal with that and they medicate that by turning to alcoholism or turning to drugs or turning to, you know, really bad relationships that are really unhealthy or turning to habits that are really destructive. And so they're in a storm that's not of their own making that they couldn't control. And because of the darkness that they're dealing with, they decide to try to feed darkness with more darkness because it'll make them feel better. And then eventually that first storm, that first situation that they were dealing with passes and they get through it. But then because of the choices that they made, they're in a second storm that's completely of their own making and of their own fault. And it's far worse than the first one that they were making, because storms of trauma and storms of suffering, they will always pass. They're always temporary. But if we choose to make bad choices to try to navigate or cope with that situation, then the storm that we put into our life that we have total control over, that's there because of our bad choices, that storm often lasts way longer than the first, and it's way worse, and it's more difficult to overcome, and it's really hard to get through. And that's what these sailors were facing. That's why Paul was like, man, guys, I mean, Crete was difficult, but it wasn't like this, you know, our lives weren't really in danger. It was just uncomfortable and kind of crappy, and we just didn't like it. And if we had just stayed there a little while longer, then this storm would have completely missed us, and we would have sailed to Rome, and everything would have been fine. And now we're kind of here because of some poor choices that we made. And I want to talk to you today about staying in the storm that's currently in your life, rather than making a decision that leads you into a storm that's way worse. I mean, Jonah's a great example of that. You know, he was in a situation that he didn't like too much, and then God was like, hey, bro, I need you to go to Nineveh and preach. And he was like, well, I think that's way worse than where I'm at. So he left his current struggle, and because he left his current struggle, he found a struggle that was way bigger than the one that he was in, and ended up being swallowed by a giant fish because dudes threw him overboard because they didn't want to drown because of him. And so storms make for the greatest stories. They do. Look at, I mean, in the church we love metaphors, and we always talk about, you know, like the storm is a great metaphor, chains is a great metaphor, you know, it's like we love metaphors in church because it's like a great word picture of what we're dealing with. It makes it easier to process. And storms exist in our lives, I truly believe, because God wants us to struggle through something so that we're able to get to the place that he wants us to go. Now, Paul had to go to Rome. And the crazy part about this story is, even though Paul was standing trial before the emperor, even though Paul knew he was most likely going to die, he wanted to be there. He wanted to go there because he knew that's where God wanted him to be. And the storm that he was dealing with in his life right now, of getting arrested, of being taken across the ocean and with men in a boat he didn't want to go in, and being stuck on an island he didn't want to be on, The storm of his situation was what God was using to get him where he needed to be. Now, the crazy part about all this is that the second storm that they are in, the message of hope that Paul presents to them is, we need to stay with the boat. Even though this boat's getting closer to land, even though you guys think this boat's going to get dashed into pieces, which it will, he does tell them, hey, this boat's going to end up getting destroyed. We need to stay with the boat. Because if we don't, if a single person doesn't stay with the boat, then everybody but me is going to die. God's going to get me where I need to be no matter what. But because you guys are with me, God's granted me your lives, but you got to stay with me. You got to stay with this boat until the very end, until this thing falls apart, however that happens. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. Now, conventional wisdom says if you're in a ship that you can't control in a raging storm and you think that sucker's about to run aground or run up into rocks and get dashed into pieces, the chances of your survival are like 2%. Once any kind of ship of any size, made of any material, steel, wood, whatever, runs aground or runs into the rocks or runs into a reef, that thing begins to break apart no matter how big it is, no matter how well it's built. Once that thing falls apart and falls into the ocean, your chances of surviving that wreckage and surviving all that debris is minimal. It's extremely minimal. And so what these sailors were trying to do was what they had been trained to do. When this thing gets close to land, lower the lifeboat, get in the lifeboat. The current will take you onto land. It's a lifeboat. And so you have a much better chance of surviving that than your ship running aground on rocks while you're too far from the shore and it breaks apart around you and it kills you. But Paul told them, y'all need to stay with the boat. You need to stay on the boat until this thing breaks into pieces, otherwise we're all going to die. And at one point, the sailors, who were like, man, we are not going to listen to even though this dude was right, told them not to sail, and they did, and now their lives are in danger. Even though Paul was right, they're like, well, you know what, he was right once, but it doesn't mean he's going to be right again. And so they, in secret, decided we need to lower the lifeboat and get out of here and leave Paul and leave the other prisoners and leave the soldiers on this ship, and they can take their chances with the boat, and we're going to get out of here because that's what seems smart. And as the men are going to lower this lifeboat from the front of the boat in secret, somehow Paul realizes this is happening. It was probably the Holy Spirit, and he tells the soldiers, hey man, they're about to lower this lifeboat, which means they're all going to die. Everyone's got to stay with the boat or no one but me is going to make it. And so the soldiers, who had no reason to believe in Paul at all, other than Paul said, don't sail, and now they're in a storm, because these guys didn't believe in God. Otherwise, they wouldn't have arrested Paul to begin with. But because of what's happening, maybe because they were so desperate and they had no other hope, these dudes ran to the front of the boat with their weapons, and they cut the rope. They basically cut and they cut and got rid of the one thing that most of the people on the boat thought would save their lives. And they watched that sucker drift away in the waves into the darkness. And they stayed with the boat. And the crazy part about staying with the boat is that I want to read to you guys verse 44. It comes a little bit later in this story. We skipped some of this because it's just information that, I don't want to take up a ton of time. But in Acts 27, verse 44, this is what it says. As the boat got closer to land, the boat definitely did run aground on the rocks a good distance from shore. It's exactly what the sailors feared was going to happen. And so you can imagine that the thing that they thought was going to kill them happens. The boat runs aground on the rocks. The waves are so bad it begins to tear the boat to pieces. And they're probably all sitting there like, man, Paul, way to go, dude. You just basically killed all of us. And this is what verse 44 says. As the boat's breaking apart, the Roman soldiers, at Paul's permission, tell all the men who are strong enough to swim, jump off the boat now, swim to shore. The rest of you who cannot, stay with Paul on the boat. And this is what verse 34 says. The rest were able to get to land on planks and on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. They got to the place where they would be saved from the pieces of the boat that broke apart. If they had left the boat, the pieces that God used to save all of them wouldn't have been there to keep them from drowning. And the whole reason why we're talking about this story is there's power in staying in the place where God wants you to be. And when there's storms in our lives, and we're all experiencing storms right now, there's the storm of COVID-19, the storm of all the civil unrest that we're facing. There's our own personal storms, our own personal sufferings and failings and struggles. When we try to run from the storms that come into our lives, we are running away from the very thing that God is trying to use to get us to a place of salvation and a place of safety. And even when we make a bad choice and get into a second storm that's way worse than the storm that we had no control over to begin with, God still provides us an out if we stay in the storm that we're in rather than continually trying to run from things. God always provides us a way to get to safety, but we have to stay in the place that He's told us to stay, even if everything around us feels like it's falling apart. Paul knew he was going to get to Rome. He had faith that no matter what happened, that even if all the guys didn't listen to him and everybody on the boat died, Paul had faith because God had told him, I need you to be in Rome. I need you to stand trial before Caesar because I need my church. I need my church to have this publicity because while Rome thinks this will kill the church, this is going to be the catalyst that I use to set this world on fire with the gospel and the message of my Son, Jesus Christ. I need you to get there because this is the most important appointment you will ever have in your life. So Paul knew that even if nobody else listened to him and they all perished because of it, that he was going to get to Rome no matter what. Because there's power in staying where God has you. It's really popular in our society today, like starting something is really popular. Like, we're going to go out, we're going to plant it, and we're all going to go out, we're going to plant a church. I'm going to start a church. There's nothing wrong with that, But it's sort of like, I'm going to start a new job, or I'm going to start a new venture, or I'm going to start a new thing, or I'm going to start this, or I'm going to start that. And it's really, like, popular and really exciting to start something. But there's a lot of incredible stuff that happens when you stay with something. It's like when you're like, I'm going to start a new Bible reading plan January 1st, it's my New Year's resolution. And by the time February 1st gets there, you've started like 10 different Bible reading plans because you kind of fell off the first one that you started. So then you started a second one 5 days later and you fell off of that one. And do you know where the most spiritual power resides in? It resides in the thing that you started and then staying with it until it's done and over with. Even if you fall away from it temporarily, even if you stop doing it, even if you stop that Bible plan for a week or 2 weeks or a month, go back to it and stay with it. Because God puts you in that place for a very specific reason. And that situation or that storm that you're in your life is what God's using to get you to get to the place He needs you to be. There's power in staying with the situations and the storms that God has placed in your life. Don't run from the stuff that God has placed in your life and around you just because it's hard. The struggle of where you're at is the catalyst that God is using so that you can spiritually grow. But if all you do is run from stuff, then you just put yourself in situations and storms that are way worse than the ones you tried to want to run away from. And the more you run, the more desperate you become and the more darkness that begins to fill your life because you're constantly trying to go to the next thing and the new thing and the next thing in a different situation, in a different place. There's power when we stay where God wants us to be. So no matter what kind of storm you're facing in your life, you need to stay with the boat. Because even as that boat breaks into pieces, the pieces of that boat are the thing that God is going to use to get you to where you need to be. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. I love you. I can't wait to see y'all in church on Sunday. And hope you have an awesome week. And I'll see you guys soon. Definitely went 20 minutes. Dang it, that's longer than I thought it was going to be.